Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations, and I am back after a mini vacation to create with the creative design team. This month we are doing some DIY Valentines for you using a variety of close to my heart products. Today I'm going to show you some techniques that I used with the Spring Blossoms Embossing Folder to create these two simple Valentine cards. Let's go ahead and get started with the project. Before we start making the cards, I do want to explain what an embossing folder is and how we're going to use it today. So we're going to be using the Spring Blossom Embossing Folder by Close to My Heart. When you use an embossing folder, you are going to need some type of machine with plates. So here I have my die cutting machine, which also works with embossing folders, and then I will sandwich it between two plates. Now, your machine may have a different type of instruction or stack or sandwich, so you need to follow the instructions with your machine so that you know how to use it with embossing folders. With this Sizzix, I have to have two plates, and I will be placing the embossing folder between the two plates before I run it through the machine so that I have enough pressure to emboss the paper or cardstock. Let's go ahead and take a look at an embossing folder. When you open up the embossing folder, you have an embossed side and a debossed side. So you can use both sides. We'll be using both of them in the project. The embossed side, which is the logo on top, gives you a raised image. If you choose to use the debossed side, your image is actually impressed into the cardstock or paper. I'm going to be showing you how to use both of these sides in our card making project today. One of my favorite features about Close to My Heart embossing folders is the slit on top. A lot of people don't know what this is used for. It's actually designed to allow you to create an embossed project that is longer than the embossing folder. So by taking advantage of that slit at the top, you could create an embossed border for a 12 by 12 scrapbook page. Now that you know the ins and outs of an embossing folder, let's use this Spring Blossoms image to create a few backgrounds for our Valentine cards. For my first card, I'm going to be inking the embossed side of this folder. This is the side that will create raised images. I'm going to be using a black ink pad, which I'm going to lightly swipe across the embossing folder. You want to do this very lightly so that you don't end up with a muddied design. You don't want any ink inside of those images. Now we're going to get our white daisy cardstock, place it on the opposite side, fold down the top of that folder, carefully clamp them together so nothing shifts, and run it through the embossing machine. Once it's been run through, we'll have the raised images and that inked background. If we had chosen to pounce it, we would have gotten a different look. Because we swiped it, we have this beautiful wood grain texture with those raised flower images. Isn't that pretty? Before we create our second background, we just need to wipe down the entire embossing folder and wipe down our surface just in case we got any ink on that. Now that the embossing folder is all clean, we can go ahead and move on to the next background. On the second background, we're going to be using the debossed side of the embossing folder. This one will create an impression of the images in our cardstock. Again, I'm grabbing some black ink and I'm going to lightly swipe it across those images. We do not want ink in between any of those flowers. We just want it to barely touch the surface of the flowers on the embossing folder. Once the ink has been added, we will place our white daisy cardstock on the opposite side of the folder, close the folder, clamping it shut to make sure nothing shifts, and then we'll run it through our embossing machine. As you can see, inking the debossed side gives us a completely different look. Now we have gorgeous black flowers in our background. So if we compare the two images side by side, you can see that this creates two totally different looks depending on which side of the embossing folder you choose to add ink to. Now that we have our backgrounds complete, we can start creating our Valentine cards. For the first card, I've trimmed down our embossed background to 4 1/4 by 4 1/4, and I've created a white daisy card base in an A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to go ahead and place the background down onto the card. Now I realize that I don't have enough room for my stamped image, so I've gone and trimmed it down to 4 by 4 1/4, and now I can stamp the sentiment onto the top. I'm going to be using one of the stamped images from our So Happy Together stamp and thin cut set. This comes with all kinds of sentiments and these 2 badge thin cuts. I want to use the stamp that says So Happy Together, so I'm going to peel it off the backing sheet, load it onto my acrylic block, and then I'm going to stamp that sentiment into the upper left-hand corner using intense black ink. Please forgive me that my voice is getting a little froggy at this point. I'm still dealing with a few after effects from being sick, so I'm hoping that you're still able to understand me as I explain how we create these cards. Now that the sentiment has been stamped onto the card, I'm going to go ahead and adhere that background piece onto the base of the card front. Once the background piece is added, we can start decorating the card. I'm going to be adding a border using our Fancy Border thin cuts. These thin cuts are designed to be a continuous cut, so you could go all along this 12-inch piece if you wanted to. I only need a small portion of this lace border, so I'm going to snip the ends and then place it down on the front of the card so that I can determine where to trim the ends. Whenever I'm using a border with a scallop or lace edge, I hate cutting in the middle of a scallop, so I always try to figure out its placement so that it looks the best when I'm trimming the ends. Now that I've determined where I want this lace border, I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive, place it down onto the front of the card, and then trim the ends. The next step is to create the bow. I've gone ahead and used this small bow thin cut die to cut the 2 pieces I need out of scarlet glitter paper. I've also cut a strip of scarlet glitter paper to go above that lace border. I'm going to start by using my fingers to shape the bow portion. It's best to curve this bow before you glue it in place so that you don't end up with a crease in your paper. Now that I've shaped both of the ends, I'm going to grab my liquid adhesive, place a small dot in the center, fold over each of the sides, and then I'm going to grab my tweezers and clamp it in place and set it aside until it dries. Now that the bow's assembled, I need to decide how I want to place this on my card. Normally, you would wrap the tab around the front of the bow and you would have an assembled piece for your project. Since the back of the glitter paper is white, I'm just going to cut off this tab. You could choose to add it if you wanted. I'm choosing to leave it off. Now that I've placed this bow on my card, it isn't really giving me the look that I was hoping for. So I'm going to go back and cut those 2 little ribbon tabs in half, which means that that glitter strip I cut is not quite long enough. So I'm going to cut another one, adhere it down onto the card, and then I'm going to use a little bit of liquid adhesive to glue one of those ribbon tabs in place and use 3D foam tape to place down the other tab and the bow. Since I left off the little tab that normally goes around the center of the bow, I've decided to decorate it with these little flower sequins. They do have a glue dot in the back, but sometimes that doesn't always stick to glitter, so I'm just going to ensure that it stays in place with a little bit of liquid adhesive. Once the flower's down, I've decided to add a little bit of glitter with a small little bitty sparkle in the center of that flower, and this card is all complete. I think the classic look of black and red is perfect for Valentine's Day, and those debossed flowers just pop right off the card. All right, let's grab that other background and start our second card. Once again, I've trimmed down that background and I've created a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base out of white daisy cardstock. I've also cut a lace border out of black using those Fancy Border thin cuts. Once again, I'm going to use the So Happy Together stamp set. This time I'm grabbing the stamp that says With All My Heart. I'm going to load that onto my acrylic block and use intense black to stamp the sentiment in the upper left-hand corner of the card. This stamp set is so versatile. You could create any feel that you wanted with the sentiment. Since this is a Valentine creation, I'm trying to keep it more of the Valentine theme, but like I said, you could use any of the sentiments for this card. Now that the sentiment's been stamped, I can go ahead and adhere down that background piece we created with the embossed side of the embossing folder. It is a little bit larger than the card base. Whenever I'm embossing, I cut my piece a little bit larger. Some embossing folders will shrink your paper, so I always like to cut it a little bit larger and then trim as needed. When I cut the lace border for this card, I made sure to place the lace thin cut on my black cardstock so that I would have a 1/2 inch border across the top. You can choose as much of a border above that lace as you want. This just gives it a nice clean edge. Now that I know where the scallops need to go, I can just glue this lace border in place and trim the sides. The decorative element on this card is going to be a flower, and I have cut the pieces I need using our 3D flower thin cuts. I've just used the 2 smaller flowers. One has been cut out of white daisy cardstock, and the other has been created out of our animation acetate. I had a little chunk of this left over, and I hated for it to go to waste, so I'll be using it on the flower. I'm going to start by using my fingers to shape the white daisy flower. I'm just curling the petals back and then folding each one of the petals up in the center. You could use some flower shaping tools if you wanted, but my fingers are right here and they come in handy. To shape the acetate, you will need some type of heat source if you want to curl the petals. I've decided just to fold up each one of them right there in the center, and that gives me enough of a 3D look for this flower. I'm going to be using 3D foam tape between the 2 layers. This isn't going to show because it is going to be covered with a button. I'm also going to use a little bit of thin 3D foam tape on the back of the white flower to lift it up off the card just a little bit. You're going to want to make sure to angle that flower just a little bit so that you don't hide any of the sentiment. Now we're going to add a little wooden button in the center. You could choose to color this button with some ink if you wanted to. I'm going to create a decorative knot in the center using some black embroidery thread. I've just grabbed an embroidery needle and I'm threading it through the holes in the button, and then I'm going to tie a decorative knot, trim the ends, and then fray the 2 little ends and stick it down in the center of the flower using a glue dot. I found that these glue dots work best for adhering these buttons down onto your projects, especially if you're adhering them down onto acetate. For me, the liquid adhesive doesn't seem to work very well with the acetate. I would really like to know what adhesive you recommend whenever you're using our animation acetate. At this point, we could have called the card complete, but I have this leftover piece of embroidery thread, and I love the look of tangled embroidery thread on a project, especially behind flowers. It reminds me of the leaves and vine that you often see in a garden. I'm just tangling up the thread. I'm cutting it in half so that I have 2 pieces, and then I've gone and grabbed some glue dots, and I'm sticking the glue dots on the ends of these little tangled bits of thread and placing them behind the flower. Now you might have to rearrange them a little bit and just play with your threads until you get the look that you want, but I feel like it adds a nice little artistic textured element to this card, and it goes well with that funky little piece of acetate. And now our floral background valentines are complete. We were able to use the Spring Blossoms Embossing Folder and create 2 different backgrounds. One was using the embossed side, the other using the debossed side, both with black ink. Each of these cards has a very unique look. This one has this beautiful brush look with the debossed flowers, and it's accented with that scarlet glitter bow. The second card had a little bit more of an artistic look with that brushed embossed background, that chunk of acetate, the little wooden button, and all of those fun threads sticking out behind the flower. Both of these Valentine cards were super simple to make and could be recreated for any occasion. I want to thank you for joining me today as we created these floral background valentines and for being patient with my froggy voice. I hope you have enjoyed all of the DIY valentines that our creative design team has made so far this week. If you missed any of those creations, you can click down in the description below and you'll see a list of all 8 of our YouTube channels. If this is the first time you are joining us, we would love for you to check out some of our past video collabs. You can view all of our past creations by clicking that playlist above. Don't forget to click subscribe when you visit each one of our channels so that you don't miss out on any of our future creations. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.